Good afternoon. My name is Barkha Dutt, and you're watching the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the issues that really matter to people. Today, I speak to you not just as a journalist, but also as a survivor of child sexual abuse. It isn't easy for those of us who have experienced this, and frankly, there's not even one friend I have who has not gone through some experience of sexual abuse growing up in India. It is amongst the most difficult things to do. And yet, the reason that I am identifying myself as a survivor of child sexual abuse today, and I was abused when I was a child of 10 by a distant relative, is because of the shocking verdict that has come from the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court. A verdict that has actually suggested, in the case of a 12-year-old who took her battle against a 39-year-old man to court, that if there is no skin-to-skin contact, and if there is no penetration, then it does not qualify. It does not qualify as sexual assault. Instead, the judge, who happens to be a woman, has punished the man but called it a minor offense and has, instead of applying the child sexual abuse laws known as POCSO in India, has chosen instead to punish the man under the Indian Penal Code, the IPC, and called it molestation, and then made it worse by calling it a minor offense. The verdict has sent shockwaves through the country. There isn't a woman I know, and there are many men I know who've been deeply, deeply disturbed by it, where the judge is basically saying that pawing the breasts of a little child does not amount to sexual abuse and sexual assault if the blouse of the child was not taken off, and if there wasn't, as the judge said, skin-to-skin contact. I thought it important thus today to personalize this conversation, to say that for all of you who have experienced child sexual abuse and are triggered by this verdict, I was too. And therefore, I start by telling you my own story. I want to welcome to the program our panel today, a panel of very distinguished people who are here to share both their perspective on law and also their own experiences battling what is indeed a demon, because so many survivors of child sexual abuse actually know their perpetrator. And I believe that this judgment is a perpetrator. It is no less than a perpetrator, than an enabler of child sexual abuse. Let me introduce one by one the people on our program. We have Flavia Agnes, one of our best known lawyers and legal activists, somebody whose work I've admired and followed for years altogether. We're joined also on the program by Jyoti Grover. Jyoti Grover is both a lawyer and a psychologist and has spent a lot of time actually working with survivors of child assault, looking at the impact, the self-guilt, the self-loathing that travels with you into your adulthood. I think she spent a lot of time studying that. We're also joined by Smita Bharti. Smita Bharti is the executive director of Sakshi. Again, has done a lot of work of sexual violence, especially when it takes place within the circle of trust. And by the way, just to share the data from the NCRB, more than 90% of women in India who are sexually abused know their abuser. And for child sexual abuse, in particular, it happens within families, it happens at weddings, remember monsoon wedding, and that is why it is so difficult for survivors of child sexual violence to actually speak out. We're joined by Harish Iyer. Harish Iyer is a friend, but he's also somebody who has spoken about his experience of being a child sexual abuse survivor. Harish was raped as a young boy and has very bravely over the years tried to give other people the strength to break the taboo of silence around this subject. And finally, we're joined by Mani Chander. Mani Chander is a founding partner at Clinch Legal and will also bring her legal perspective to this conversation. I'd like to start on the program now, in fact, with Flavia. And Flavia, the Bombay High Court seemed to be, in fact, a progressive bench, a woman judge, calling into question our assumption that if you have more women on the bench, you won't have judgments like this. What do you make of the absolute horror of this judgment, Flavia?
It's all the more difficult for me and for Madhis in general, because this judge was our POCSO judge in the city civil court, and she has, in fact, been very sensitive while conducting trials, recording evidence of victims, etc., even prior to POCSO. And she's given like amazing sensitive judgments in favor of children who were sexually abused and have convicted the accused person. Now she's a High Court judge. There's much greater responsibility on her shoulders. And for her to make these comments, which will now become precedent if if they are not taken out from the judgment, is extremely shocking for me. Several people have commented that judges need training, judges need orientation, judges need sensitivity. And here is a judge who has all of that, everything that we can think of. She's not a stranger to this issue at all. She has enough exposure to this issue, even as a trial court judge. So, what does one say when somebody comes with this bizarre explanation of skin to skin contact? Where does POCSO Act even say such a thing that there should be a skin to skin contact? What is sexual assault? Is a act which is not penetrative, but with a sexual intent, and there has to be contact, but it doesn't say skin to skin contact. If you could not take out the top, for instance, does it mean that there was no sexual intent or there was no sexual assault? I mean, it is just beyond my imagination to envisage the reasoning behind such a judgment and such comments, which were stated in the statute, and that is more worrying.
Can I ask you though? Oops. Let me just mute you while I ask you that question. Can I ask you though? You are actually saying that this is a judge whom you've known to be sensitive, whom you have known to have worked previously specifically on the child sexual abuse laws. This is not a judge whom lawyers had classified as insensitive. So what is it then? Then we're just dealing with a very, very deep mindset of sexism, which actually believes that, till there is bare skin to bare skin, till you're actually doing this with sexual intent. I mean, why would you paw a 12-year-old child, firstly, a 12-year-old child's breast if you did not have sexual intent? Secondly, I have a problem with this phrase sexual intent, because abuse is not about sexual intent. Abuse is about power. Abuse is not about desire. So I also have a problem with this phrase of sexual intent in this language, Flavia.
Exactly. And what is worse here, this man locks the door from the outside, puts the child inside, child is crying inside, and he goes out. So what could be the intention of this person in doing that? And was it not indicating something much more sinister that's going to happen when he comes back into the same house? It's just fortunate that the mother traced the child, located the child in that house. Now you have every possible ingredient enough to uphold the sentence under Section 8 of POCSO. Why would she then go to 354 of IPC? I mean, that is unimaginable. 354 is an ancient legal provision. We have POCSO, which is far more modern, far more progressive, far more recent. So why would a judge leave this ground and go to something which is archaic to minimize his sentence? Because here the minimum is 3 years, and she wanted to reduce that. And she has this absurd logic. So let's go to 354. In fact, there is Section 12 under the POCSO itself, which talks about sexual harassment. So why would she go to something so archaic that as 354, violating the modesty of a woman?
Yeah. So
it's beyond me.
Yeah, I just want to bring in at this point Jyoti, because I'm just wondering what the impact on this child at this point must be. And you've spent a lot of your life actually studying exactly this, Jyoti, and not just the legal aspect but also the psychological aspect. What is going through this child's mind at this moment? She's a child of 12.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I would just want to blend this with the legal aspect as well, because the law is very clear that if a child is under 16, then in any case, there is a presumption of guilt on the part of the accused. And he has to then, go on to show why he's actually not done the act. And for a child who's under 16, the concept of consent, the concept of knowing what is right or wrong is really not, acceptable to the law or even to the child. And what we've seen in these cases is that increasingly, children and their parents are actually not going ahead and filing cases. And even if they do, they realize that it's not going to work. And I want to also highlight here that it starts with the police, because if you look at this particular case, did they even in the FIR, for example, talk about sexual intent? They probably did not. And the charges that they framed were perhaps not very complete. I mean, they only looked at Section 8. The child is 12. It's not very clear that on the date of occurrence of this, was the child below 12. And any child below 12, for example, these are far-reaching consequences. I also run educational institutions, and I find that children who've been molested, and I mean, like you said, Barkha, you've gone through that horror yourself. This stays, it impacts their relationships, it impacts the kind of trust they start having in people. I've seen so many relations not working out because of the kind of stuff that they have gone through in their childhood.
And my problem with this is that if you actually have a judge telling you that what you experienced to be assault was not assault, what you're going to end up doing, and this is a classic thing of child sexual abuse, I know because I experienced this, you end up blaming yourself. You end up thinking that it was your fault, that you partook in something that was dirty, that you had a choice, that you could have done it otherwise, and you're haunted by that feeling of self-loathing well into your adulthood. And that is why it is so damaging what this court has done.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I mean, I was thinking about this, and I was looking at some of the court judgments. For example, there was a court judgment by the Sikkim High Court. Yeah. And in that judgment, and if I can just take a minute, the case was of a 9-year-old. Okay. Yeah. And in this case, the perpetrator was a coach. And he basically was very happy because the 9-year-old had done a great job in some athletics event. And he hugged and kissed the child. And the Sikkim High Court ruled in that hearing that even kissing and hugging a child with all clothes on, amounts to sexual assault, and it's a very visible sexual intent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Before I actually come to Smita, I just want to go back to Flavia for a moment, Flavia. And my question is this, right? There are so many reasons why this is a problematic verdict. One is the refusal to apply the child sexual abuse laws of the POCSO Act, applying the adult Indian Penal Code instead. Secondly is to deem that if your clothes don't come off, it isn't sexual abuse. Then that can be the template even for adult crimes of sexual abuse and violence, right? Then that means all of us who've been pawed and pinched and groped in public spaces or in private spaces, this is not going to give us any right to say to sexual abuse. And finally, this language, sexual intent. I mean, what does it mean, sexual intent? You are locating abuse within the framework of sexuality and sexual intent between a 39-year-old man and a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to give a small correction here to what Jyoti said. It is not age 16. After the POCSO came into effect, it's age 18. Everything under age 18, the consent factor is not there. So it is deemed as sexual abuse, even with consent, if you have sex with under 18. So that is the new law. And we are going towards more progressive interpretation all the time. So in that, this judgment looking backwards in both ways, both in terms of how much of proximity is required for it to come under the purview of Section 8, sexual assault. Yeah. Whether it has to be skin to skin, whether it is, you can even have penetrative sex with clothes on, ultimately. So what is the big thing about this? That skin to skin and etc. And also, there is also a section where if you make the child do things to you, actually. So does it matter whether he was wearing his clothes or underpants or whatever? I mean, how do you interpret this? But the question that is, what is sexual intent? I think that is a very valid question for all of us who we think we are very progressive, our thinking is progressive, we are advancing, etc. But we are still bogged down with this whole concept of sexuality, sexual assault, sexual intent. Everything is rather than an assault, rather than a harm to the child, physically or emotionally or in her psyche, we are going on whether the intent is sexual. So if you penetrate without sexual intent, so there is no rape. What are we talking about?
And what this is doing, I'm sorry, I'm just putting you on mute for a second, Flavia. What this is doing is it is undoing all the slow incremental progress that we have made on this conversation. The Justice J.S. Verma committee after the Nirbhaya case, it is undoing all of it. Smita, Bharti, let me get you into this conversation. For activists, this is a body blow, right? It's a body blow at so many different levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, judgments such as these have become a deterrent to whatever little reporting that is taking place, also. I mean, stringent punishments are seriously not the only solution, but dismissing the progress that has been made in arriving at a legal framework for sexual assault by limiting it once again to something as inane and irrelevant as skin to skin contact, clothed or unclothed, it is regressive. And the court has also failed in its message that is being conveyed to the 12-year-old girl and all other 18-year-olds and under 18-year-olds who now have to believe that regardless whether they're clothed or unclothed, the consequences of a grown man who sexually assaults them will not be appropriately meted out. I mean,
Yeah.
what kind of a message are we talking about over here? That the abusers and the assaulters can once again yet get away with it without any serious consequences? Isn't it time that we started looking at child sexual abuse and sexual assault from the lens of infringement of the autonomy of the child and about violating their
Yeah.
boundaries than
Yeah.
thinking about skin to skin contact?
Yeah, it's actually so disturbing that as someone who's been a journalist for almost 3 decades now, most things don't disturb me, but this coming from a woman judge of the Bombay High Court, it just appalls me that Flavia tells me that she's normally quite a sensitive thinking judge, then just makes me paralyzed. Harish, you're a survivor of child sexual abuse. This is triggering for anybody who's actually gone through this. And I know your story well, but there might be people who don't. How old were you when you were abused? Did it take place within the circle of trust, as it often does?
It was my uncle who sexually assaulted me. I was 7 years of age, and it started with touching, and then it was penetrative assault. And many a times I have been sexually assaulted with my clothes on. The problem that I have, Barkha, with this particular verdict is, what if they use Section 3, IPC 354, which speaks about outraging the modesty of a woman, when actually it's a child, it's not a woman. What if it was a boy? What section would they have applied if it was, if somebody tried to push themselves anally with their clothes on, and I had
Yeah.
my clothes on? What would have happened then? Would I have no recourse in the law? Would I, because does it mean to say that because I'm a boy, I have no modesty? I mean, it only outrages the modesty of a woman, but it doesn't outrage the modesty of a male child.
Yeah.
So I think in a lot of these aspects, and Barkha, many a times I have been sexually assaulted with my clothes on. I have worn my clothes. I've been lying next to my assaulter, and my assaulter has penetrated me where I didn't wear my clothes. I had my clothes on, and he used to do things to me with my clothes on. So what happens
And
then?
and not to be graphic about this in a voyeuristic way, and you know me long enough, Harish, to know that I will not ask this from any space, but to underline how awful this verdict is. Well before you were penetratively assaulted, as you said, your abuse started with touch and your clothes were on, and it was not skin to skin, but it was assault. And I think it's very important for the judge to understand that. So I want you to just speak to that experience, what you felt at that time, how grotesque you would have felt, how much you would have blamed yourself, how it would have scarred you, how you would have felt judged, what a child goes through when all of this happens to us.
I hated myself. I didn't look at myself in the mirror. There were times when I looked at myself in the mirror and I wanted to break the mirror. I used to hate. I became an atheist because in the room that I used to get sexually assault, where I used to get raped, it faced a big portrait of Lord Shiva. So I thought that God was watching me and God wasn't doing anything for me. So I was a complete atheist. I used to, in fact, put the book down and I used to stamp on it just to tell people that there's no God. So I used to hate myself, and it took me a lot of time. My sexuality was completely destroyed because I didn't feel like, every time I felt towards any human being, a man or a woman, I used to hate myself because sex by itself became a bad thing for me. So for me to come to terms with my sexuality, I'm happy to be gay, but for me to come out and say that I'm gay, I blamed my sexual abuse for the longest time. I even after coming out, even within the community, within the LGBT community, people used to tell me, "Oh, this is just because you've been raped." So I so it destroyed me completely, and there were times when I have looked at myself in the mirror and have loathed myself. I've hated myself. I have been body conscious. I used to think that there are fluids dripping out of different parts of my body. I used to hate when people look at me from behind. I never could walk properly. I used to walk with my butt wobbling all the time because I was very conscious. I couldn't study well. I couldn't stand up in class well. I couldn't speak to my friends without the fear of being judged. All this it cost me, and this was for what? This was for some person trying to do something with me,
Yeah.
and this also got aggravated.
And when you hear the judge then talk about clothes on, no skin to skin contact in one sentence, you want to say what to this judge?
I I think she is misogynistic. She
Yeah.
is horrible and insensitive. I mean, there is not a
Yeah.
shred of sensitivity in this judgment.
Yeah. Smita, Harish, first, thank you. And I know that every time you have this conversation and you bare yourself for the world, you relive this. So first, thank you, and just thank you. Smita, yes.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Harish, for this. And I just want to bring attention over here that as per the 2007 very ancient study, FWCT said that 1 in 2 is a survivor of child sexual abuse. And I want to draw attention to this panel for the judge to say out of 6 people over here, I can see 3 of us. I'm a child sexual abuse survivor as well. And 3 of us over here are survivors. And this is a message that really needs to go out over there. This is a reality. It's a fact. It's
Yeah.
not something that can be ignored.
And Smita, thank you again, because I know every time for a person to sit, in public gaze and say, I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, I know what that takes. But it's the same reason I opened the program with sharing my story, that the judge has to understand that even the official data doesn't tell us the real story. And the official data, by the way, is pretty dire too. The official data last counted in 2018 tells you 109. Can we just switch to that banner as well? 109 children were sexually abused in the year 2018 every day. And that's just the official data. And that doesn't include me, who didn't go and file an FIR. It doesn't include Smita, who didn't go and file an FIR. I don't know, Harish, did you ever file a case and get
No, I
yourself
didn't.
reported as one of these statistics?
I didn't because there was no law against child sexual abuse, and there was no law for men, boys who undergo child sexual abuse.
Yeah, but the point that Smita makes is important, that if 3 people on this panel of 6 are saying we are victims of or survivors of child sexual abuse, then this is the big untold story of our time. This is the monsoon wedding of our lives, right? Mani, you were wanting to come in. Go ahead.
See, all I wanted to say was that the judgment does not take into account the fact that there was also an attempt to remove the minor salwar, right? This point has not been fairly accommodated. It goes on to discuss the aspect of groping of the breast of the child. It then ignores the trauma of the mental trauma of the child and gives a really bizarre interpretation of sexual intent. It does not even acknowledge that, in such cases, there is a challenge of proving intent. And even though sexual assaults are typically, these are considered subjective experiences. For example, under the DV Act or under the POSH Act, these are considered subjective experiences. So what may be sexual assault to me might not be to another. And the court completely disregards this.
Yeah. And I want to push you though on that, money. Suppose the salwar was not removed or attempted to be removed. Suppose she remained fully clothed and her breasts were pawed, or someone came and flashed before her, or stripped, or masturbated, or didn't even touch her. It is sexual assault.
Absolutely.
I think we're focusing on the wrong thing by going on talking about whether the clothes came off or not. How does it matter if the clothes came off or not? How does that matter, Mani? How does that matter?
Absolutely. I think we need to look at the legislative intent of the act, right? So anytime we interpret the provisions of the act, we must look at why this law was framed. And the reason was to bring in stringent provisions to punish perpetrators of crimes against children. And this judgment goes against the very heart and intent of the very enactment that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I just want to go to Flavia and ask you how distressed you are that this has come from a woman. Now, of course, as feminists, we know that patriarchy and misogyny are both gender neutral. Men can be feminist, women can be misogynistic. But a woman judge, it sort of questions all your beliefs that if there were more women on the bench, you would not have judgments like this. Flavia, what do you say? Sorry, give me a second.
More women judges, of course, will become more sensitive. I disagree with that completely, because our women judges come from a particular caste, class, religion, background, class position, caste position, everything, particular religion, particular caste, etc. And when they become judges, they want to be more like male judges and imitate them, rather than bring in gender sensitivity within courtrooms and within their judgments. And they're extremely scared of this. So they turn backward, according to me. Rather than turning towards women, they become anti-women. Even in maintenance orders, we have seen it in everything, the comments that they make, etc. But this particular judge was not like that. And that is where my heart is broken. That is why I say, people said you need more sensitivity, you need more gender training, you need something else, judges need to be educated. She had all of that. Each one of them, like, was a speaker in many of the workshops, training other judges.
What do you think happened, Flavia?
That is what is shocking to me. That is what is so shocking to me. And what is the difference 3 years and 1 year? The punishment. Why did she have to go to this and make such scathing comments? It is beyond me to even understand. So I feel totally shattered, and I feel that as they go higher up the judicial ladder, what will it become from their particular sensitivity as a trial court judge, going against the grain of court culture? And then when you rise up, you become somebody else. You become just another person. That is what I cannot understand at all. And I've seen it in some instances, but this instance is something I know personally. They've invited her to all our workshops because she was so sensitive to conduct trials of children who are being abused.
Now, Smita, you wanted to comment, but I'll just bring in Jyoti first and then Smita. Jyoti, go ahead. Jyoti.
Yeah, so I think, when it comes to sensitivity, I have been really struggling on this point because I work a lot with, the underprivileged and with various schools. And I mean, one is the sensitivity of the court procedure. The other is just the sensitivity in terms of, people not normalizing behavior. And what I'm seeing a lot of this is that, why go into this? This is the way we are, and we have to accept a few things. So I think when it comes to, the awareness, no matter how much we are doing of that, it's really not helping. And these kind of judgments only reinforce that thought. It's better not to, get into this sphere, because it's really not. So the best thing is, let the child not be out of your sight. Don't make your child independent, because independence means you're, making the child more vulnerable. So I think it has big, far-reaching societal issues now, which I'm really worried about.
And as it is, the girl child in particular is killed with overprotection. You crush her dreams by wrapping her up in gossamer and never setting her free. And you're absolutely right that the ripple effects of this could be very deep. I just want to go to Smita and then to Mani. Smita, you wanted to make a point, but I also want to understand how much this is going to set back families from approaching court. In the case of a child, the child has no agency. It is their family who has to decide. As it is, families have such a terrible time in our country, and I'll ask Harish about this, accepting that one of their own can do this. And it almost always is one of their own.
Absolutely, Barkha. I just want to add to what Flavia was saying, because for me, I just have one line for it. This is what systemic misogyny looks like. I mean, I would just kind of put it together in that. And then just taking forward what you were saying, I mean, is it wrong that we can, if there are inconsistencies in the interpretation of this law, then that the judiciary chooses the law with the stricter punishment for the person who's accused of the sexual offense? I mean, is it too much to expect? Is it because groping while when one is wearing clothes and walking on the streets has been so normalized that we just have to manage it, and it's not even going to be considered as an abuse or an offense, and we're just supposed to just accept it just like that? I mean,
that is such an important point, because, when I was growing up, part of being tough was to be able to take that public transport bus to college, be pinched, be pawed, and come back playing basketball and staying back in school and coming back raat ko, because I was a tough girl. It's like our country is like an extended boot camp version all the time for women. It's just that now that misogyny has shifted online. It's gone from physical public spaces to online spaces, the same bloody language. But that's such an important point. Money, what's going to happen? We had a big Me Too movement in this country, and yet the one high-profile case we saw was where the accused took the woman to court in the Priya Ramani case, right? So, and then you have a judgment like this, and then you're just thinking how much systemic misogyny is a person going to deal with in this life. It's just going to keep women and the families of children silent.
See, not only is this judgment going to take us back several years in terms of the POCSO Act and the progress that we'd made for child rights, this same template, as you had already said, is going to be followed in other cases for other women also. And Harish has spoken of his experience. What does it do to male minors? It leaves them without any remedy, because under the IPC, there is no offense made out for outrage of modesty of men. So where will these people go? It'll have huge repercussions and will set us back many, many years. The women's movement, all the efforts that have been made will be diluted for a long time.
Yeah. I just want to bring in Harish on this point of how families respond. And I thought that Smita makes such an important point about how this is going to actually change, the willingness, because as it is, families are so unwilling. One of the reasons that children don't speak out about child sexual abuse is that they do not want to upset their parents. Sometimes they're abused by one of the parents, but oftentimes it's a relative, a friend of the family, a distant relative, a cousin. In your case, it was your uncle. And that fear of, that needing, even as a child, to protect your parents. It's such a strong thing, or to protect the image of your family. And so, you have a judgment like this. What do you think, this is going to do to that family-child relationship when a child wants to speak out about child sexual abuse?
I think India in itself has a culture where we respect age, and I have a problem with that. What we need to respect is behavior and not age all the time. And because it could be somebody, and because we are such a respecting nation, where we kind of all the time, Dadaji aaye hain, Dadaji ke pair pado, Chacha ke pair mein giro. So you have already created these hierarchies, which makes it very difficult for the child to open up. And when the child opens up, the first reaction that the child is met with is, this person is so respectable, and how can this be? No one will believe, even if the parents believe, they have this whole fear of log kya kahenge, and the fact that no one else would believe that this person is so respected that no one else will believe when we start speaking up. So I think we need to develop a culture where we respect. I'm not saying don't disrespect people who are elderly. All that I'm trying to say is that we need to develop a culture where we respect behavior over age. Like it could be a 10-year.
What was your experience, Harish? How old were you? Because often many years pass, right, before a child is ready to speak about what's happened. Sometimes the child speaks while the child is still young, as is in this case. What was your experience? How old were you when you finally decided to confide in your family, and what was their response?
Barkha, I was raped from the age of 7 till the age of 18. I was gang raped from the age of 11 onwards. My uncle used to get people home, and all of them used to have sex with me. They used to rape me. I opened up only when I was 18. For 11 years, I endured this. Though I knew that I could, by the time I was 15, 16, I knew that what was happening was wrong. But just to muster the courage to say the word no took me so many years. And when I opened up, the first reaction was, first, there was no awareness about male child sexual abuse. So the first reaction was disbelief. The second reaction, my father actually asked me, if you were quiet for so many years, now he's quite supportive. But at that moment, my father asked me, if you're quiet for so many years, were you enjoying with your uncle? So those were the reactions that were there, because it was so unheard of, and that's how women are also asked. I mean, there's the same thing where you just change the gender of the person, and you'd see that women are also asked the same thing. Why were you quiet for so many years? Why didn't the parents notice for so many years? Why didn't the society notice for so many years? Why wasn't there infrastructure for children to open up? Why wasn't there sex and sexuality education in schools and colleges? We don't ask these questions. We often point the finger at the child, because by the time the child speaks up, the child is already an adult.
And Harish, that point when your father said to you that you must have enjoyed it, right? I mean, in a way, the judge is doing a variation of this here by calling it molestation, by saying, no big deal, yaar, blouse to nahi utara. If you bring this judgment down to its barest idiotic form, it is no big deal, blouse to nahi utara, haath to nahi mara. That's what it is.
I think that's what's, the moment I was trying to not read it again and again, simply because it was so triggering. And that's exactly that was the exact thought that came to my mind also. That's exactly what my father had said. Probably you were enjoying it, or probably is there a manual to how I should get raped so that it's serious enough for the court?
Yeah.
If there's a manual, then please define that manual. Tell me that, okay, these are the 10 things that the person has to do, and then I'll testify and say that these are the 10 में से 5 things किया, so please isko ye karo.
Yeah.
There is no manual.
Yeah, I know. Flavia, can the Supreme Court jump in?
If the state goes on appeal, maybe.
But who would it depend on?
It
would have to depend on the family, right? Whether they take it to appeal?
No. It is a case of the state.
Oh, I see. Okay, because the criminal. Okay, so the Maharashtra has to decide whether it. Can the Supreme Court take Can the Supreme Court not take suo motu notice of this verdict?
I think it can. I think it can in public interest. But if judges are ready to stick their neck out and pick up this case, respond to the newspaper reports and so on, to take up this and say that these comments must be deleted. That even a High Court Chief Justice also can do this. There was another case in the Bombay High Court, another judge, quite sensitive at that, about a child who was adopted, and she was asked to write in a letter at the time of adoption that she's habituated to sexual act, and she was just 13 or 14, an orphan girl, and a judge used that for granting bail to the adoptive father who had raped this child. And then we made so much noise about it, and we asked the public prosecutor to bring this matter on board and argue that these comments should not be there because this is a bail application. It's not even a trial. So what impact it will have when the trial starts? That the child, a 13-year-old or I think even lesser, has habituated to sex, she enjoys sex. She has to write this.
What is the answer? I need to start taking last comments. I'll start with you, Smita. What is the answer? I mean, systemic misogyny, we agree. These are judges of the High Court, and guess what? The Sessions Court judge below this, the judge below this judge had delivered a much more progressive judgment. So basically, we're not seeing that as we climb up the chain, and it should be the other way around. It gets more progressive. Smita.
So I would like to say that while we do need deterrence like POCSO, we need judges who are not misogynist, and we also simultaneously need to work on prevention, because we're all focused so much on protection, and POCSO is where the harm begins and the redress has to come in. But we also all seriously need to start considering prevention that actually addresses the 4 basic barriers that are actually keeping child sexual abuse tightly within the family circles, which is denial, silence, shame, and stigma. If we can actually start addressing this and actually get the language to call out the abusers within the family and have the courage to actually take a stand and not have to ask questions like, did this really happen? And this is our gaslighting the children and saying this is just make believe and you really don't know what is happening. If we can actually begin the prevention right there within the families, I think that really is where we need to be headed towards.
Yeah, Mani. I think as a young lawyer, if practicing in the courts, You must be pretty heartbroken at this at seeing a woman judge lead a judgment like this.
Absolutely, I'm shocked. In fact, I wrote about this too because I was so shocked, and not a lot was being said by it besides much chatter on Twitter. But what's interesting is that this is not the first judgment from the Bombay High Court. In fact, exactly about a month ago, I want to say, nearly a month ago, the Bombay High Court had held that touching hand to express love without sexual intent is not assault. So then too, the burden had shifted to the girl, and the challenge of proving this particular intent curtailed the reach of the POCSO Act. Then too, this had happened. And what's interesting here is the judge calls it in her order a minor offense. That is truly shocking for me. So far as remedies are concerned, I would like to say that we need to increase financial investments in child right protection. We need to bring civil society and the government together to work so that children are protected. And I think the problem goes to show that the deep misogyny in our culture, and that's what needs to be tackled at home first.
And also, frankly, these holy cows, right? To think that that all of these institutions, that the family unit, the marriage unit, the parent-child unit, that these are somehow these sacred spaces where nothing untoward happens. I mean, there's so much gloss we put over these spaces. There's so much resistance, Jyoti, to accepting what actually goes on in some of these spaces.
Right. So I have actually got 2 points to make over here. One is the role of media, because, for example, this case has created such an uproar, and rightly so. But at the same time, I think there are quite a few other state judgments, be it the Bombay High Court, the Sikkim High Court that I spoke about, Calcutta, which have been fairly progressive. So I think it's very important from a psychology of the reader point of view, that while they look at this judgment and see how crass and how unfair it is, but they also get to see that there are courts out there who are delivering more reasonable and appropriate judgments. Because when people see that, the faith in the judiciary will not completely kind of nosedive. And I think that's
I take that point, and that's why I actually felt that there's been some progress. And to me, this judgment was so disturbing because actually we did have well-established norms. Flavia, would you reach out to this judge? She's somebody you know. I'll give Harish the last word, but first to you. She's somebody you know. She's somebody you all have conducted workshops with. Would you reach out to her and say, take it back, say you made a mistake? What were you doing? What were you thinking?
I don't know whether one can do that. She's actually in Nagpur. She's not in Bombay. If she was in Bombay, I would have definitely gone and met her. But now we are thinking of some collective action about this, taking back these comments, how it can be done legally, etc. I think that's very important. But as somebody else commented, I find that it is a minor offense. That sentence is not that serious because she didn't touch the skin. I find that most offensive. And somebody remarked on one of those groups saying that if she has a child of 12 years and somebody did that to her own daughter, how would she respond? Would she respond in the same way? Or would she think this is a minor offense? It's a done thing to touch somebody's 12-year child's breast? And does she not understand the psychological impact it has on the child? I mean, how can you even think as minor offense, such a serious thing? And 354, in this regard, and Harish rightly pointed out, if it's a boy violated like this, where would you go? If you're not under POCSO, where would you go? You have no avenue. And that's, according to me, a very important point.
Harish will give you the last word. Sorry, Flavia. Just I need to wrap. Harish will give you the last word. As you said, you when you read this judgment, you remembered what your father had said to you. You remembered, you relived what you went through. Harish, what would you like to say to this judge?
I just like to, not to the judge, but what this stresses on is the fact that there needs to be awareness. And this reminds us, this is a gruesome reality, that we don't have the world, we don't have the judiciary, we just have us survivors to protect ourselves. And today, something remarkable has happened. We have 3 survivors who have spoken up over here. In the end, we don't have the world, but we have us. That is something that we need to realize, and we need to understand. Every child who's watching this, every parent who's watching this right now needs to underline the fact that your child, if the child has gone through child sexual abuse, is not alone, and your child could become a journalist like you, could become a child protection activist, could become an LGBT activist. We could become who we really are, irrespective of what the judiciary, or what the judge says, what anyone else says. We can become who we really are, and that's something that's there. This judge, I will not tell her anything, because I don't think anything that I tell her would fall to deaf ears. That's what it looks like.
Well, I think I just want to leave everybody with the thought that even the official figures paint a very grim picture of more than 109 children abused in this country, assaulted in this country every single day. And as we have established, if 3 of those children, one's children, are on this program and did not get counted, you can only imagine how many more are not being counted. This is not a story that happens to other people. This is your and my story. This is happening in our homes. This is happening to people we know. This could be happening to your child, my child. So please speak up. And as somebody said, please end the denial, please end the stigma, encourage your child to distinguish between good touch and bad touch. And when she does, if you do not believe her, if the courts of this country do not believe her, I think there is nothing more to be said. I do hope, Flavia, that you're able to lead a collective action and get this judgment, these comments in this judgment withdrawn. And even the framing of this act as a minor offense is very, very disturbing. Thank you. And thank you in particular to those of you who shared your personal story. We will continue to follow up this horrific judgment. But for now, I will say goodbye to all of you. Thank you for watching very much, and see you soon again. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.